Hi, Dave. Welcome. Today I'm joined by James Douma. He is a machine learning expert. He's been on my channel many times, talk about Tesla FSD, autonomous driving, and artificial intelligence. Want to welcome you back on the show, James. How are you doing?
Great to be here. How are you?
Yeah, doing great. We got a lot to talk about. I know you just came back from a trip, I think, to Oregon and back to California, Southern California. Elon Musk gave a bunch of comments on FSD in a recent interview by Silicon Valley Tesla Club. And so we'll go over those comments. And then also, I think you just installed Starlink, right? So we're
hmm
running this interview on your side off of Starlink. How's it
hmm
been using Starlink?
It's been great so far. I've only had it a couple of days. I've moved it. I unpacked the box, set it outside,
Hmm.
turned it on, and it came up in 60 seconds. That was great. And then after I ran it for a little overnight to just sort of get a sense of like how the thing worked, I put it on the roof and connected it to the house network. So for the last couple of days, like my house is full of equipment that's on the internet constantly, and it's been better than my cable.
Mm.
The
Yeah.
cable, I live in foothills, and the cable is very sketchy here. It's fast when it works, but we have all these little outages, and we frequently have outages that are a couple hours. And I'm
Hmm.
expecting, like just on that metric, Starlink is going to be better. I was expecting
Yeah.
lots of sizable outages, like every day, a few minutes here and there.
Yeah.
Like that, it's not like that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm taking Starlink. I'm leaving in 2 days on a long RV trip, and we're taking Starlink. The only problem is, in the past when we've tried it out, like last month, if there are lots of trees, it's really hard to get
Yeah.
coverage. But it works fantastic if there's like open coverage. I'm guessing as they put out more satellites, they'll get better coverage. Maybe without as big of an
Oh
open
yeah.
sky, you're gonna get decent, reception. So
It,
yeah,
it was interesting watching there. I realized some things about, because it's got a motorized mount and it rotates itself,
yeah,
uh, to get the best view of the sky. And when you look in the app, you can get a sense of what the field of view is for the antenna, because it gives you a little map of that and it shows you where the obstructions are and that kind of stuff. And now it makes perfect sense to me why they decided to motorize the mount, because it can sample where it's getting obstructions, where the trees are, and then reposition itself as it learns about the environment to get the best view of the most satellites most of the time. And that's just brilliant. And then
yeah,
as the constellation fills out, as they add more satellite, because right now for me, the antenna is pointing due north at a 50-degree inclination because I've got fairly clear skies.
yeah,
Because that's where all the satellites are, right? But as the
yeah.
constellation fills out, like if they really had a lot of satellites, it would point straight up, right?
Hmm.
Because that would give you maximum sky. So, it's going to be an interesting gauge to be able to watch the Starlink antenna as the constellation fills out. It's just gradually tilt back, and eventually it'll point straight up.
Yeah, yeah. So did you have to get on a wait list for a long time to get your Starlink
Oh
or
yeah,
yeah?
I ordered it like 15 minutes after the store went live.
Oh
So
wow.
I had a super low number on the thing, but
Yeah, yeah.
I'm in Southern California, and I'm a low priority in Southern California. There's so many SpaceX people and whatnot that live out
Yeah.
here. So,
Yeah.
but I'm glad to have it. It's going to be great. And
Yeah, yeah.
and I really didn't think that I was going to be tempted to drop my other internet service, my cable internet service. But right now I could see that actually happening. I'm planning to set up a load balancer so I can run both connections, and it'll
Hmm.
automatically swap between them according to which is performing better. But like Starlink has been so good for the
Yeah.
24 hours, 48 hours I've been using it that
Yeah.
I may not even bother.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
keep the cable as a hard backup so I
Yeah.
can go like
Yeah.
move the plug if I need to.
Yeah. I probably for the next year or so you want to probably keep your cable. I've heard some people just occasionally every month or so there's like some type of, I don't say outages, but like the service gets hit during service. Like they're trying to upgrade the system or something, and for an
hmm
hour or two it really gets hit. So we'll see. All right, James, I want to talk about your trip here. So you went to Oregon, you came back, you tweeted that how it blew you away, your drive. So let's do first like kind of 30,000 foot overview on your impressions on FSD Beta versus, let's say, autopilot that you've driven, let's say that route many times. So what was kind of like the big picture overview difference between FSD Beta and autopilot with using the same drive to Oregon?
Well, I mean, this drive is a tough one to compare because it was perfect. Like it was, On this drive, on this route, it surprised me by being discontinuously better than I've ever experienced before, even previously on FSD. It was just perfect. It drove the whole 128, and its acceleration and deceleration going into the dozens and dozens and dozens of blind curves, or decelerating from 55 miles an hour, which that's the speed limit, and I just I set it. I was hands off. I didn't interact with it at all. It just it did the whole thing by itself. No braking, no acceleration. I didn't push it through any curves, and it just nailed it. It just completely nailed it. Like, I was completely blown away. It was by far the best drive I've ever had in any autonomous vehicle on FSD myself. It's my partner. She's ridden shotgun on this ride a zillion times, and she was just like, "Oh my God, I can't believe it." So she's got a ton of experience from the passenger seat watching this thing on this drive. It was just amazing.
So you've driven this route. So it's the 128. I guess is it in Oregon? This route?
The 128 is in Northern California.
Okay.
It runs from Cloverdale, which is on the 5, across to the coast. It goes through the Anderson Valley, which is a winemaking region, and it gets to the coast just south of Mendocino. And then I count the drive like from Cloverdale, where you get off the 5, all the way along the 128 and up the coast, because the coastal drive is actually pretty tough too, up to Mendocino. It's got some very tough, 15 mile an hour, 10 mile an hour hairpin turns that are in gullies with like really steep banking, and you can't see, totally blind, like really hard turns. And prior to this, like, I had never seen FSD successfully do a sub 15 mile an hour turn, 15, where you should drive like it would be posted at 15 miles an hour. This would be a hairpin. And especially if you got a hairpin where there's an incline or a decline, the approach might be out of the field of view. The geometry is very complicated of the road surface. So judging the speed to do that smoothly, perfectly comfortably, perfect braking going into the turn, perfect acceleration back up to your target speed as you go. It's a really tough problem. And I was not expecting to see FSD do that soon. Yeah. And mostly because I've driven it so many times. Like, I can see, I've seen the steady progress. Now, I mean, before FSD on AP, when FSD came out, I've driven it a couple of times on FSD now, 345. And, so I've seen the steady progress on FSD since I've got it. And this was just like, boom, it just.
So how long is this, the whole route, the 128 and the one going
67 miles.
67 miles, okay. So you're talking about perfect, so you're talking about no disengagements or anything?
No, frequently, like when I'm driving around town and whatnot, I'll adjust the speed up or down. So the settings I had it on right now, I have it set for assertive, and I have it set so that it just drives the speed limit, like whatever it thinks the speed limit is. And luckily on this route, the speed limits in the maps are right. So it wasn't guessing the wrong. The speed limit's not posted. It's a 55 mile an hour posted speed. Very large chunks of it cannot be driven safely at 55 miles an hour. As I said, there's probably half dozen sub 25 mile an hour turns, which have always been hard for that. I mean, really hard for AP. They've been challenging for FSD. FSD, up until the most recent time I drove it, it could reliably do anything down to 20 mile an hour turn. But 20 miles turns would be 50-50, whether it would successfully do them, to say nothing of comfortably, just to successfully navigate the turn. And 15 miles an hour turns, never seen it do it, right? So on this drive, it did 3 15 mile an hour. It just nailed everything. There are 3 15 mile an hour hairpins on this route. And there are, probably 3 or 4 20 mile an hour turns, and then maybe a half dozen 25 mile an hour turns, and then tons and tons and tons of 30 mile an hour turns.
Okay, so did for slowing down, is it slowing down because it sees the speed limit slow down and then it slows down, or is it slowing down because it actually is seeing the turn?
Now, some of the turns will have a marker posted that will say, what the advisable speed is for turning it, but probably 25% of the turns are posted. most of them, they're not posted, so it can't be using the sign. And the sign doesn't seem to correlate with how the system is behaving. Like I can't actually tell if it's responding to the signs or not. Huh. It's having to make the decision based on what it sees, because like this problem isn't solvable with GPS. Even, I don't, as far as I can tell, the maps aren't good in it. Like the maps have the curves in them, but sometimes the maps don't have the right curve. It shows the curve too tight or not tight enough. GPS, the circular error probability for GPS on a road like this just isn't very good. Mm-hmm. You can't use it to judge going into a turn. They may be using it in complement with stuff, but you have to be doing visual judgments of road geometry and making your decisions about that. And I had expected them to get to where they could do it, like relatively soon, certainly inside the next year or whatnot. That was just the rate of progress. Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't expecting them to get to where they could do it, and it was like just completely indistinguishable from a good human driver. Like my mom could not drive this route this well.
I mean, it sounds pretty crazy. I mean, because typically, like, for example, let's say you go through like a 15-mile hairpin turn, like either you're going too fast and then it disengages or something, right? Because it's not judging correctly, or it goes too slow during so it's
and
hard to
you're stopped well short of the turn and creeping through.
Yeah.
So it stops midway because it's not quite sure, and then it jerks the rest of the way around. I mean, 15 mile an hour, all the hairpins I've done. I call it if a turn is 170 degrees or more of turning, and the speed, the transit speed is less than 20 miles an hour, I call that a hairpin. So
so I mean, it would seem like it's a huge progress where you could not just be able to do these things, but not too slow and not too fast, right? These turns, and not to rely on the speed limit signs completely or GPS completely. So you're doing vision only, mostly probably, and you're doing the right speed, the right time. I mean, this seems pretty crazy. This seems like more advanced than most, like all the.
I've never tweeted about FSD drives before. Like this one was just like next level. Now, I kept using, like we drove the rest of the way up the coast after Mendocino, and for the next few days I used it on lots of other mountain roads, and it wasn't. The other drives weren't as good as. When I say they weren't as good, if you discount intersections, if you just talk about the part of the road where the road's curving, you're doing blind turns, it was great on those. On this whole drive, I didn't have any issues there. You do get stuff where you've got some weird intersection. Like there's an intersection in the map where the road is curving and like some little driveway is coming on, but in the road, it's in the map, it's an intersection. And so the car comes up to it and it's looking for an intersection. It's not seeing an intersection because it's not really an intersection, but that's how it's marked on the map. And the car would get confused. It would like slow down, be a little jerky. It would get through it, but it wasn't this perfect, smooth, sublime, indistinguishable from a good human driver experience. And so that happened a couple of times. And I had a couple of, weird intersection in a small town where I did an intervention because like it was just acting weird and I didn't want to inconvenience people around me. But we were gone for some days. We drove, I don't know, probably 12 or 16 hours total. I used FSD AP the whole time, and I had maybe 3-4 interventions the whole time. It was pretty small, but previous versions of FSD, like I wouldn't have been surprised at the 3-4 intervention kind of thing. Like it's kind of been in that ballpark. But the thing that was just shocking was like, you're driving this windy mountain road and it's like perfectly decelerating, coming out of the turn and rapidly accelerating. I mean, I've got a Plaid, right? Yeah. Like it'll get back up to 55 like that, right? And then it'd zip along at 55 and you'd come into the next turn and it'd just like sweep around the corner and blam right up. And there were many, many turns where I had oncoming traffic or, blind traffic around the curve. You could see the vehicle, it would behave slightly differently in the presence of other vehicles than it would like if it had the whole road to itself, which is like, that's what humans do, right? Yeah. I mean, it was just like, I was really, really, now a certain amount of this, like I don't expect it to always nail it. There's probably a certain amount of luck in this. I mean, it wasn't bad weather. There were things that could have made it worse. It could have been, really bad traffic or something, which occasionally happens on this road. So there was a certain amount of fortitude. But there are trees on both sides of this and cliffs and stuff. So you're driving along and you go from super bright sunlight to it's really dark, because all of a sudden the trees are and there's long sections where like you're driving along and the sun's coming through. And so it's like a strobe light on the window. It's going super bright, super dark, super bright, super dark. And it'll do that for like 10 minutes around curves and stuff, right? Where, the road is narrow. You got a tight turn and there's a tree right on the edge of the road, where like you don't, and it's a dark tree trunk in a dark shadow and you're coming at a bright light. Like it seems like there's so many opportunities to not get that right. And they're big chunks of the road where like there's no markings, right? Or the markings are terrible or the markings are wrong. And it did great on all of it. I was really, really impressed with the performance on this.
So Elon commented on this Silicon Valley Tesla Club interview a few things that has helped FSD recently. So first was removing radar, and then the second one was kind of interpreting the bag of points not with heuristics or C code, but rather using neural nets, right, with the bag of points to find the lane center and stuff. Do you think any of those two changes has been I guess have those changes led to the improvements that you saw in any way?
There's good reason to think that the static map improvements are probably a big component of the link, because what's really critical to get this is to know the shape of the surface of the road and where the boundaries of the road, and not just like is it turning left or right, but is it banked? Because looking at a road in perspective, and it's all the same color. It doesn't have a ton of features to it. You see the stripes kind of go, but there are multiple ways that could be interpreted as to like what is the road bank. Because the thing about the road bank, it's not that you need to speed up or slow down differently for banking. That's kind of true. But the thing is, if a road is banked, it's very easy to misunderstand the shape of the curve if you're just looking at it like monocular with no depth. You need to understand the depth well in order to understand that arc. And you need to understand the arc so that you actually know what the real curvature of the road is as you go through it. So it's a pretty difficult machine learning problem to do this just with cameras and to get it so right and be so confident in your driving that you're braking at the last minute as you go. Not so late that you make people uncomfortable, but it's not braking really early. It's not waiting a long time to accelerate after it comes out of turns. It's just like, just nailing them as it goes through. And so one of the impressive things is the confidence of the autopilot team that the software can do this. Like they've clearly got the driving parameters set to a relatively tight margin, at least on this drive. And, and that indicates to me that they're pretty confident in how the system is behaving.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think your drive kind of illustrates perhaps the advantages of a Tesla vision only approach. Like if you compare it to perhaps what, let's say, Waymo could do. Let's say you take a Waymo car and stick it on the same route. How does it perform? What does it do?
Yeah. It's, I suspect Waymo could do this anybody could do this if they wanted to. If you just tune for this one drive,
sure,
and you know it really well and you map it really well. Like if you just do the HD mapping of the whole thing, like that's a huge advantage, right? So I'm sure Waymo can do it. Would they do it? How confident? Because doing it, there's being able to technically do it, and then there's being confident enough that you're going to give it to 100,000 newbies and turn them loose on the world with it, right? I mean, that's a lot of confidence. So is Waymo that confident? I don't really know. Could they do it? Yeah, they could do it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, but again, it would have to be like HD mapping and like doing the route many times.
Waymo way.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I mean, just having LiDAR. This is actually a pretty good LiDAR situation if you're going to use LiDAR in this, because it's pretty easy to interpret with trees, rocks, the road surface, the occasional oncoming car, and then having LiDAR to know the road surface, it could be a significant advantage in that situation. Like the thing that Tesla has got to get right, the shapes of these curves, is something LiDAR will help you with that in that space. So yeah, I think. Waymo's got a $200,000 sensor suite or whatnot, and it would be well applied in this situation. But Tesla's doing it with a bunch of $20 cameras, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure. And I guess there's also this advantage, or I don't say advantage, but this thing with vision and with more data, right? And they're able to tackle, let's say, roads like this, and it gets better and better. Because in some ways, it's like in 6 to 12 months and 2 or 5 years, it's just getting better and better over time. And you have more and more data. In terms of, with LiDAR, HD maps, I don't know if you'll see the same level of improvements unless the hardware gets better. I guess you'll have the software, get better too, but I don't know if it's the same exponential like improvement rate that neural nets and large amounts of growing data would provide. I don't know, with a large fleet. I don't know. What's your take on kind of this rate of improvement, LiDAR versus like a
Waymo's got
vision?
all the hardware they need to do a great job, and they got smart people. If they have an obstacle, it's that they decided to do it a certain way, and the way that they're doing it might be holding them back. Like, if they have a sensor fusion mechanism that they're using for their radar and their LiDAR and their cameras all together, and that sensor fusion modality has some limitations, but they're committed to it because it's important for some other thing that they're doing, then yeah, that could be a problem. There aren't fundamental reasons Waymo couldn't do this, or that other people couldn't do this, right? I mean, Tesla's got a huge advantage with the data collection, like that much is clear. And I don't expect other people to do it. I mean, on the Tesla owner Silicon Valley video that you mentioned earlier, one of the comments that Elon said was, they're looking, they don't see anybody else pursuing their approach. He thinks they've got a significant, like he was talking about having a 5-year lead on solving the problem before other people, can do it. And that, like, he doesn't think they'll respond by changing what they're doing until they're suffering, their business is suffering because of this. Like, they're going to stay on the path that they're on until they're really clear that it's not working for them. And that all makes sense to me. Like, I can believe that that's true.
Okay, so this 5-year kind of lead comment that Elon shared. So he thinks they'll be 5 years ahead. I guess once they solve full self-driving, it'll take probably another 5 years for others. Is he talking about, you think, just vision only approaches? Or because it seemed like with LiDAR and Waymo and, Cruise others, more with the geofenced area that they, might be able to solve, obviously, like, this taxiing those areas. So do you think Elon is referring more to a generalized solution that's like affordable for everyone?
Probably. Yeah. Cruise and Waymo's ability to do, I mentioned them because they're the biggies. I mean, there are others too, many others. But their ability to do what they're doing is, they can do what they're doing. The question that they face is scalability and how competitive is that business, right? Because they've sunk a lot more money into the development than they thought. Their platforms have gradually kind of gotten more expensive, and they haven't, as far as we know, they haven't done the mass production work to like drive down their sensors. Google famously did some on LiDAR. They developed a bunch of their own, to drive the cost out of that. Although I think in Google's case, that was more about the fact that they just couldn't get the LiDARs, right? It's the Velodyne just didn't make enough of that stuff for their needs. And so they started making their own, but they did get the cost out of it, but they still, if you have a trunk full of GPUs that you need, like, that's not a good solution for this. You need to have purpose-built silicon, purpose-built computers to like really do it. When Google spends the money to actually design that silicon and start building those cars, that'll be a good sign that they really believe they're going to scale. Like, they're going to go spend $1 billion in scale now. They're going to do stuff that only makes sense to do when you're ready to scale. And at least so far, they don't seem to be doing that. So I'm not expecting them to suddenly start scaling next year.
Yeah, makes sense. And also, I think there's an issue where with like mass market consumer cars, it takes a while for these OEMs to release kind of these new technologies. They're not really anxious or really trying to get the best. And it's all a low cost margin issue, right? They're just putting the basic things every year. Like for example, I have a 2022 Buick Encore. It's GX. It's a SUV, small SUV. It's a tow. We tow it behind our RV. It's like the one of the only tow vehicles we could find with the right size. But it's got this lane keeping feature. I think it might be Mobileye's system, but it's like it's this lane keeping feature where it doesn't really keep the lane. It kind of like nudges you when you like, kind of get near the lane or cross the lane, and nudges you back. But then if you don't really nudge back, it won't really work. It could take you off lane. So it's just no man's land where it's not really keeping the lane for you.
Is it intended to be lane keeping, or is it just there's a
it's called lane
exit warning?
It's called lane assist, I think, or something. But yeah, it's a very conservative, I think, implementation, and but it just reminds me of this thing where I think with the OEMs, they're not anxious to really push the envelope with new technologies, with liability and all this stuff. So the 5-year thing could really be, there could be a 5-year lag between just like this OEM delay of implementation. But then you have maybe another, I don't know how many, or multi-year lag of the actual technology, right? So it could actually be more than 5 years before, mass market, see something after Tesla does.
I don't see how GM is going to do this, or how Volkswagen is going to do this without without recapitulating what Tesla did. The one exception, like if you wait long, because the thing is, the difficulty doing the problem is getting easier and easier all the time, because the neural network, the fundamental tech this stuff is based on, is getting better and better. And I've said before, and it is true, that eventually this will be a high school science project, because the neural networks will be good enough, the computers will be fast enough, the databases will be big enough, the techniques will be known, and you will just be able to sit down and do this problem. So somewhere between now and then, anybody who's willing to spend some money and take a year or two will be able to just do this. Now, how soon will that be after, Elon gets to whatever milestone he thinks constitutes, having it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would think it'll be more than 5 years after, the first person doing it the way Tesla's doing it, which would be Tesla, right, gets there. And it gets easy enough that like Comma AI's got a great solution running in your car, and they'll sell it to you for $1,000. Because like that's a great thing. Like eventually it'll be good enough. Like that Comma thing, eventually it's going to work. Like maybe not the particular piece of gear they make right now, but eventually that approach will work. It just needs the tech to get good enough.
Well, okay, so there's, I guess, a qualitative difference though. Like for example, you could have a search engine that works, but it's not as good as Google search, like for example, it's like, yeah, you just scrape the web and you apply, different, known techniques, etc. But there's a gap. It matters who has a better search engine, right? That qualitative difference matters to the point where Google has basically almost, a huge, the vast majority market share because of that qualitative difference. So in a similar way, don't you think like autonomous driving could have some of that dynamic where significant qualitative difference could actually mean like a huge market share advantage?
It could. The dynamics in the car business are kind of weird. I mean, in my perception as a engineer who consumes cars is that there are vast differences between cars that the market kind of ignores. Like, there's an unbelievable number of really crappy cars that sell, which I think are selling because marketing works and consumers don't know that they're not getting a good deal. It's not a good car. It's not a good fit for you. They're buying it anyway because they're being persuaded to. So could good marketing trump having a good product in the self-driving space? Yeah, sure. I could believe that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's also like, for example, the difference between the iPhone and other phones. Like right now, I look at the car market as pre-iPhone. It's like a bunch of non-differentiated phones. It's just they're differentiated in the form factor and little things, but they're very similar in the functionality of each phone. But when the iPhone came in, you just had this huge jump in value that the iPhone could give, and eventually these other OEMs couldn't catch up because iPhone operating system and ecosystem and App Store, all this stuff just accelerated that qualitative difference, right, of what an iPhone could do versus
you either
these
copy
other.
them or you go out of business trying to
Yeah.
find a different way to get the same results. So everybody just copied them, right? And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what
So I mean,
happens.
in some ways, it seems like with cars, like there's this thing where people are getting the cars because they're cheap. They're like a cheap phone or something, and there hasn't been this iPhone moment where it's like, oh my gosh, the value is so much higher with this car. I think Tesla started that with kind of their cars, but they're still not in reach, for most of the market. But it seems like perhaps full self-driving, autonomous driving, could be that killer feature that makes the car so much more valuable to the average person, and that could change the game of how people see cars, so that
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
the bull case is that Tesla becomes that embodiment of the full self-driving car that works better than anyone else, right, and creates kind of this the standard of what this differentiated, right, car or vehicle can be.
Mhm.
So I mean, I don't know.
It, I don't think Tesla has to win at the expense of everybody else for like the bull. So in a scenario where like Tesla succeeds and some other people succeed on their terms, like Waymo Cruise, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I think the upside is so huge for Tesla that like they don't need everybody else to fail. If they succeed and other people succeed, the upside is still insane. Like it's still a bull case.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, looking at the market today, looking at how the company, like in my opinion, it is like Tesla is not getting any meaningful contribution to their market price or their market prospects from Wall Street or investors in general. Like there are certainly investors who do give them that credit, but I would say the substantial majority of people putting serious money into the company stock are not. They might be considering it a call option, but they're not paying much for it. But
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, it does seem. I agree. It does seem the market. It kind of feels like the market is ignoring FSD because there's uncertainty of whether or not, like, when it's going to happen and who's going to be, the leader in autonomous driving. And because there's question marks, the market says basically, we don't know, so we won't value it, right?
it's the FSD version of the competition is coming, right? And I
Mhm.
mean, even the car version of the competition is coming. It's a dumb argument. It's so dumb. The backlog for the company is insane. Like I don't
Yeah,
know how much you must not be paying attention to think that a demand problem is going to come out of the woods next week because of competition or whatever, right?
yeah,
That Tesla's not going to be able to sell. And Tesla's FSD prospects, incidentally, they're limited by their car business. Like they can only make so many cars. And the business for FSD is much larger than the number of cars Tesla can make for like the foreseeable future. So, even if Waymo wildly succeeds, even if Cruise wildly succeeds, even if Comma AI succeeds,
yeah,
right? They're not going to be a limiter on Tesla's FSD business for quite a long time,
yeah.
like
Yeah,
farther than the horizon for stock valuation.
that's true. I mean, yeah, because I mean the scalability problem, with lidar. I mean, yeah, I mean, I mean, it goes back to Elon's point where he's like, just try it out, like, try out FSD beta, track the improvements over time, and you'll see where this is headed. I think a lot of the skepticism comes from people or investors who aren't doing that, who aren't tracking the improvements. If you just kind of like ride in an FSD beta car every 3 months and compare it to the best consumer kind of available driver assistance systems out there in consumer cars
Mhm.
every 3 months, you'll see the rate of improvement just be super fast with Tesla. But others, I mean, that I think that will give a better kind of understanding or view of the competitive landscape. But it just seems like people are closing their eyes to FSD beta because the excuse is Elon is always late. Elon is overpromising. He's promised it last year. Therefore, he's always going to be late. This is like, and then you have the argument from some, and one of the most prominent, kind of folks that are or persons that are has an alternative view is Gary Black on Twitter, where he's like, "Hey, everyone's going to have." Level 4,
Right.
In a few years. Like, what's the big deal about Tesla?
Mhm.
And that's why he can't, per se, value FSD, right now because everyone's going to have it. I mean, he might add some incremental value, but it's not that big of a issue of a deal. So I mean, what's your kind of thoughts with all of that?
So for everybody to have it, the tech has to advance so fast that you don't have to do what Tesla's doing in order to get it. Like the argument that other people are in the same ballpark or keeping up or close, like if you believe that, you're not really paying attention. Like, because I don't think, Mobileye isn't doing it. And the people doing the robotaxi business models, like their system isn't fungible to cars, right? Cruise may succeed, but GM isn't going to copy the Cruise hardware and start putting it in, the Chevy Blazer. You're just not going to see that happen. They don't have a straightforward path to taking their robotaxi development, moving it. So what do you got? If Mobileye doesn't do it, do we expect Blue Cruise or Super Cruise to, suddenly leap really forward? Like, I don't think it's technically possible to do that. I mean, you have to build the organization. You have to learn all the lessons that Tesla. I mean, even with all the new techniques that have come out since Tesla started working on FSD, like in 2014. I mean, there's been really significant advancements that if Tesla had the tech today, if they had back then the tech that they had today, it probably would have knocked a couple of years off. And it could do that for other people. But they got to build the fleet. You need the million cars, you need all the cameras, you got to collect the data to do it this way. The tech isn't going to be good enough to like make it so that you don't need the fleet for a while now. So I don't know if Gary's position is, the technology is just going to explode in the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And 5 years from now, it's going to be really easy and everybody's going to do it, which is an interesting take. But I don't think, that's probably not where he's coming from. I think he thinks, that GM is just, they got some smart people, they'll spend some money on it and they'll solve the problem because they have to. And I don't think they will.
Yeah, I mean, you're making an interesting distinction between, let's say, FSD or autonomous driving for consumer cars, and then you have FSD or autonomous driving for commercial, let's say call them taxis or something. Mm-hmm. And these are two distinct, I guess, groups because all of the companies or most of the companies working on commercial taxis, autonomous driving, they're doing these, 6-figure sensor suites, LiDAR that aren't applicable. They can't transfer over to a consumer mass market car, and they're geofence, all this stuff. So if you look at this consumer car market, right? Who's doing autonomous driving for this car, mass market? It's really a different story, because you have to take out the Waymos and the Cruise and these other companies, and you're left with. You
learn useful things from doing a robotaxi, but you do not get a system that can be put in a consumer car. You do not. Yeah. You have to take what you learned, take the people who learned it, and start over and do the consumer version now.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in that sense, I mean, when you distinguish it like that and you're looking at, and also this commercial taxi business, it's another
different business.
Yeah, it's a different business. But if you look at the consumer car market, you can make an argument that Tesla is so far ahead, with, autonomous driving efforts in this consumer car market that second place is far, far away. I mean, we're talking about years and years away. There isn't this close second place, right? Or close third place. It's really Tesla and then everyone else like multi-years, behind what Tesla's doing. And again, what you're saying is how are they going to, really do autonomous driving in a consumer market car, which needs, low cost, without doing what Tesla's doing, like without following their approach.
Yeah, and they need mass production, consumer hardware.
Yeah, and to this date, no one is sticking in, even with, what Tesla did with, 2017 with, their autopilot hardware 2 computer. No one's even doing that in their cars, and that's 5 years late. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, Mobileye has silicon and they're putting cameras in cars and, they're making an effort. It's just not ambitious enough to solve the problem. Everybody who came into this space has thought that the problem was going to be easier than it has turned out to be. Cruise and Waymo and, lots of other players, Google, and Tesla, they have all been optimistic in their expectations for how fast they were going to make progress. This has not been because the technology hasn't proceeded well. It has generally been because people have underestimated the difficulty of the problem. The problem is, you work on it for a while, you solve the thing that you thought you had to solve to get it to work, and the world shows you, okay, there's this other thing that you didn't know about before because you weren't far enough down the road. You got to solve this too. And then you solve that, and then you find another one, and so on. And that's not to say they don't make progress. It's not like, Zeno's paradox where you just never get where you're going. You do make progress, and it is going to get there, but it takes longer than you think it's going to. And it may be that in Mobileye's conception of the right way to do this, that it wasn't going to be that hard. And they committed to an approach that didn't scale up the way that they needed it to. We'll see. I don't follow Mobileye super closely, but they seem to be like, if you're going to take the point of view that other people will have FSD relatively soon, or some equivalent, layer 4, L4 tech that you could deploy into cars. You got to be, Mobileye is the most credible sort of thing going on out there, because at least what I've seen of Blue Cruise and GM Super Cruise, those are not serious efforts to solve this problem, right? They are not going to get there with what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Mobileye, it's a tough one for me. It's just because they're working with the OEMs. Like, Mobileye doesn't have their own cars, so they have to rely on the release schedules, right, of the OEMs and their budgets and the restraints of all of that, which adds, I think, many years, right, to the process. And then you have, I think, Mobileye is getting, like, I don't say unfocused, but they're having this whatever approach. They're like using LiDAR now, like, other stuff. And I don't know if that's the right approach, really. I mean, if they were really just to copy Tesla, then I would say, hey, maybe they can.
Right. They would need a big OEM to make a commitment to do that with them. And my read of their tech, like looking at what I've been able to figure out about their chip layouts, and looking at what I've been able to figure out about how they're doing deployments and the data that they can capture and whatnot, is that they didn't, like Tesla, they didn't expect it to be that hard. The other thing is they, it seems to me, really believed that the way that the market was going to go was the L2 ADAS market was just going to be everywhere long before self-driving was going to be something that was expected of the thing. And I think they're maybe having to reevaluate that. The other thing is they were not doing neural networks early on. I think they still don't make silicon, which is completely dedicated to doing neural networks. They started with a vision approach because they were pre-neural network when they started working on this. Everybody, who started working on this prior to 2012 was not using neural networks because neural networks didn't work for this back then. But then, in some sense, Mobileye had a similar problem to what Waymo has, which is, okay, we've got this big investment in this approach. There's this new tech and it might work or it might not. Do we bet the ship? Do we just drop everything we're doing and go with this new thing because we are convinced that is the thing to do? Mobileye didn't do that. Most companies wouldn't do that. So, it's totally understandable, but they keep getting farther and farther down this road, and they don't commit to jumping ship and switching over to the other approach. And Tesla, to some extent, you could say that it was fortuitous, their timing, or it could be that that Elon saw ImageNet in 2012 and that is the thing that is going to do it, because from day one, they did the thing that I really believe personally is what needs to be done, which is you go all in on the neural networks and you bet that the tech is going to get better and it's going to keep pace. But at every point along the route, you use the best development technique that is going to work if you just keep pounding away at it. And that's what they did. And I'm one of the things, my takeaway from the Tesla owner Silicon Valley video that we were just talking about is that, it reminded me again that I'm so happy that somebody has the resources, the guts, the fortitude, right, to do it the right way. They didn't get unlucky by making a big bet on the wrong technology and being unable to back that out, which a lot of the other big players did. And they believed enough in the technology to make a huge, putting all the sensors in the cars long before you had the tech to do it is incredibly expensive. That's just a huge bet. And it's hard for me to believe that if you didn't have an organization that was as dominated by one person, because one person can do this kind of bet, but as soon as you get a committee, you're going to have somebody who's like, I don't know if that's going to work. Maybe we shouldn't bet the farm on this. Like, it's too much money. Yeah. We'll look like idiots. We'll get sued. And in that video, Elon's like, yeah, we're going to get sued. Yeah. That's just the incentive system of the world. That's the way it works. Some people are going to die in that thing, and we're just going to have to make the case that we're saving a lot more people than are dying in accidents, and it's going to suck, but it's the right thing to do, and we're going to do it anyway. And like, man, how lucky are we that there's somebody doing that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, once you start, making decisions by committee, I think there's a sense of like this cautiousness that comes in, reasonability, but yeah, sometimes it does take someone with kind of
no board of directors will make this decision.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So,
definitely unique. So I think in part 2 of the Silicon Valley Tesla Club interview, Elon, maybe it was I think it was part 2, but he was basically saying without FSD, like, Tesla's basically worth 0 or something. Do you remember that part? He's like,
I didn't watch the second video. I only watched the FSD part of the third one.
Yeah. So he was basically saying, I don't want to misparaphrase it so people can watch the video themselves, but the gist of it, we were saying Tesla without solving FSD is basically whatever. It's like worth nothing. And it's really
people
all
don't
about
get how big a deal FSD is going to be from a valuation standpoint. Like, I think, like, I don't know what he said. I didn't hear the quote, but if what he was saying was, look, if you compare Tesla with FSD to Tesla without FSD, like the without FSD, that's a rounding error.
Exactly.
Right? It's small. Like, people really don't get how big this is. They really don't. It's yeah.
So it was interesting because it caused a bit of a controversy out there because some people took it, I won't say literally, but they don't understand the context of what Elon is thinking. And they're like, oh my gosh, Elon thinks Tesla's worth almost nothing. It's like, and I think the context of how Elon thinks.
It's only the most valuable company ever without it. But it's not the 10 times more valuable company.
Exactly. Like the context of what Elon, I think, is thinking in his brain is like, with FSD, I think actually it goes further than that. Like, with autonomous driving and with humanoid robot, all of what that includes, like we're talking about something that's mind-blowingly crazy, and it's so much bigger than the current valuation of Tesla right now. And so it's like, I won't say it's a rounding error, but it's like you can't compare these two. And that's his way of kind of talking, saying this, oh, it's worth almost nothing. It's a exaggerated, right, a phrase in a sense, but he's doing so because there's a comparison, right? There's something much crazier out there, and I think if you don't understand that, if you think FSD, autonomous driving, all this stuff is just going to add 20% to Tesla's valuation or something over the next few years,
I have a financial model where I had to build a model because nobody else actually takes the thing seriously enough, and I went and I built this big fancy Monte Carlo model so that I could plug in what I think the probability distributions for all the important factors are and get this probability distribution of outputs. And like when I click the checkbox, which is like add FSD versus taking it, like the scales on all the charts have to change, right? Like it's not a small difference.
Yeah, definitely. Crazy stuff. It's so interesting to me. It's interesting that, like there's such a divergence of opinions and beliefs on autonomous driving, and but yet, to some people, and who knows, I could be wrong, who knows, but it just seems like it's so obvious that Tesla is in the lead, is in a commanding lead with the consumer market, autonomous driving, and it just has huge valuation ramifications. And on top of that, it has huge ramifications on the next type of possible business with humanoid robots. And if they can, transfer and actually execute on a super high level, right, in that field, it just seems like, it's pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, I really enjoyed that video because it was so, like, Elon almost seemed like he was tired. He was just kind of rambling, but in his rambling came out all kinds of cute little, I mean, a big part of it for me was like, we got the, because you and I, we've been talking about this for a while, and we guess about a lot of stuff that you don't know for sure. You're like, they said this and we heard that, and this must be the interpretation, but you can't be 100% sure because a lot of it we're basing on, these scattered comments or whatever the deal was. But he said a lot of stuff in this that strongly reinforced the impression that we've gotten about this. And so like, I feel like our vision for what they're doing is on track, what it's like internally to be doing this. He had a comment on that one where he said, like, from outside the company, it's hard to judge, right? Yeah. From outside Tesla, it's hard to, and the way I take this is it's hard to quantitatively, you can kind of qualitatively understand the gist of what's going on, but you can't really do it quantitatively unless you've got the numbers. Unfortunately, the numbers, people beat up Tesla for like not releasing the data.
Yeah.
To make the case that this is. And I think that is, people who are making that case haven't really thought super carefully about like what the data looks like and what the case has to look like. Because I sat down to try to figure it out at one point, and I my takeaway from that was that it's really complicated. Like, it's a lot of data. It's not this super simple number. Oh, you just have this number and we know it's safe, or we know it's not safe. It's, even if you have all the data, it's a complicated argument. People have to listen to it, right? They have to listen to it and they have to look at it and take the data on a neutral stance. Anybody that comes to the stuff with an opinion pre-formed and they're just looking for, to satisfy their confirmation bias, the data that just destroys people's confirmation bias, that's going to be when it's out there and working. That's just reality, right? Yeah. That it's very, the highway statistics aren't, accidents on highways versus accidents in cities, right? There's you pull the NHTSA accident data. There's 60 categories of roads, and the large majority of them are in this kind of no man's land, kind of between. So depending on how you want to bin those, you can get whatever conclusion that you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to ask you actually about humanoid robot, because AI Day has been postponed, right? It was like, I think, was it July or August, and then it's moved to September. I think end of September now. I think September 30th or something. And Elon says that they're going to show or try to show a working prototype of this humanoid robot, and we also know it won't look like the prototype that they've shown, at least externally. So what's your expectations? Like, what do you think Tesla will show? Have you like any kind of ideas?
Well, if it's a recruiting event, then you show something that is going to impress people who know. Yeah. So what you're going to show is something that's going to impress the people you want to recruit, which are people who know a lot about robots. And so, they don't need a fancy plastic exterior or something that looks like a consumer product. What they're going to be impressed by, they'll be impressed by showing some behind the scenes stuff. Like, hey, we're using this algorithm, we're using these computers, we've got this new technique, and, like that will impress people. It'll leave them with an impression that, because what you want to convince them is, like, a Tesla's got a chance of succeeding, that it's going to be an interesting place to work. You're going to get to work on cutting edge stuff. You'll learn a lot. You'll get to work with great people. Like, that's what they want to show. So it's going to be teams and technology and that kind of stuff. As far as the product, like, it could be a pretty clunky product that's got some, that's got really cool tech running on it, which is cool if you know the tech, because you know the tech, right? Because I think you can assume that the people coming to this thing that Tesla wants to get, they're people who will be able to tell, the surface stuff from the deep details. So it might not be as impressive to a random layman as it would be to the target audience, which is experts in the space, or people with a strong engineering background and a passion for working on this problem.
So I can imagine a few different kind of initial first kind of possible demonstrations. So one is like a walking robot, like bipedal motion. It seems like, obstacles, jumping, or just, different, going up, down ramps, up, down stairs, all sorts of stuff like that. Another category is more like moving, picking up objects, interacting with the objects around, that type of thing. And there are other kind of more advanced like dexterity, with like solving a Rubik's cube, right, with one hand or something, which to me that seems like, I don't know if that's where Tesla's headed in the initial stages at least. So
locomotion is unsolved. Bipedal locomotion in arbitrary, complicated environments is an unsolved problem, and showing progress on that would be impressive. The interesting thing when you look at objects in the real world, like, some people will be impressed by being able to pick up, stacked Legos or simple things like that, just being able to do it. But what's going to super impress, like being able to pick up a water balloon, right? Like that's a really hard problem, right? Or a bag of potato chips. Like this is when Amazon did their whole picking challenge. And it turns out those air-filled bags, because they're squishy and you got to know, you don't want to break the bag, but as soon as you touch it, it deforms. Like that's a really tough modeling problem. So there's all kinds of superficially to a human being, simple things. Picking up something that's slippery, anything slippery, is really, really hard to do. Like it's an amazing, and so you don't need to juggle a Rubik's cube. If you can pick up, an oily bottle, or pick up a cat. Pick up a cat and hold it like this, right? With a cat like squirming around trying to, I just made that up, right? That's really hard to do.
Yeah.
Right? If you can pick
hard
up
for humans to do too.
In your arms, like that's a freaking robot Turing test right there.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of just like getting a robot to walk, I wouldn't say just to walk, but actually to be really good, right, with balance, up and down stairs, all this stuff. Like, when do you think Tesla could become the world's leading kind of company in that type of, bipedal, locomotive motion with robots? Do you think they could do it this year, or will it take, you think, a few more years?
Well, who's doing it, right? Yeah. There is no bipedal market. So, anybody that came to market, like if the only thing you had was a bipedal robot that could just move cubicle cardboard boxes around a factory, if you made 100 of those, you'd be the world's leading manufacturer of bipedal, material. It's like there's no market right now. So it's kind of an interesting question to ask. There are people who work on robots and do research. Commercial companies that are doing this just kind of, there are lots of small companies I don't know about. So maybe I'm probably dissing somebody by omitting them, but it wouldn't take much to leap to the front.
My impression is there are a lot of small companies, like maybe under 50 people, doing a lot of robotics. They're funded. They don't really have a lot of cash flow there, but they have a lot of ideas, prototypes, robots, doing a lot of stuff. But it seems to me that Tesla, with not just their resources, but also the ability to recruit people, it seems like they could leapfrog most of these small companies pretty quickly, with just the talent and resources and the ambition of the project they're doing too. So I wouldn't be surprised like this year, like Tesla, and maybe it could be at AI Day where they show some, demonstration where it's like, wow, like Tesla in this field of robotics really is pushing the envelope now. They've become maybe not the leader in all of robotics, obviously right now, but at least in a certain area, right? They're like, at least, I don't know if it'll be evident, but maybe it'll be, people will start questioning it that, maybe Tesla is becoming, a leader.
People question whether they're the leader in level 2. Which is like, people question whether they're the leader in electric vehicles.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
People question stupid things.
Yeah, interesting stuff. AI Day. I wonder if it's probably going to be another one of these small kind of recruiting events. So it'd be hard to get in, and but it'll be definitely fun to watch and to see what Tesla reveals there.
It would be super cool to be able to go. I don't know. I have to see if I can. I became much more courageous about asking the company for stuff after going to Cyber Rodeo with you. I'm like, maybe I could get into these things. That would be fun.
Yeah. Awesome, man.
Well, Tesla owner Silicon Valley had 5 guys do a sit down with Elon. I'm like, okay, I could ask those questions, right?
Yeah. So. Definitely. Sounds good. All right, James. It might be a while before I talk with you again. I'm on the road for a while, but I guess if something comes up, I'll bring you up. I have Starlink and other stuff I could probably hook up for an interview. So
Get a big camping spot so you don't have too many trees to deal with.
Yeah, exactly.
You should do that pole thing, right?
Yeah, actually, the reason why I'm towing a vehicle now for this trip, this is the first year we're doing it, is so I could have like a recording space, and then if like there's trees, I could just drive the car somewhere where there isn't trees and just hook up my Starlink and get internet. So yeah, it's definitely possible. Yeah. All right, James. Fun talking as always with you, and yeah, have a great summer, and we'll catch up soon. And
You too.
Thanks for
have a great
watching.
trip.
All right, we'll see you guys. Bye.
Bye bye.